Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, another listener question episode. I've accumulated 10. They're from different sources. You can always bump into me at a card show. I'm happy to converse with you there. I do to answer questions in person, but when I get the email or if somebody says something at a card show, I'll make note of it. I might answer the question for them. But really, if it's a reasonable question, I want to answer it for anybody that listens to this on podcast platforms or on YouTube or wherever it gets passed along. I'm trying to answer questions that are interesting to me and I hope interesting to you too. I'm still at drjamesbeckett@gmail.com and I'm at every national and pretty much all the Dallas card shows up in Waters Creek. Those are a lot of fun for me. Feel free to interrupt me if I'm sitting at a dollar box. No big deal. I just plow through until somebody comes up and talks and then I visit and then I get back to work. I roam around a little bit, but am certainly enjoying the card shows and just being a free agent, that I don't have to be behind a booth. That is not something I would enjoy. But thanks sponsors, Topps Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Hugs and Scott Auctions, Mike Stay Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Medium, Beckett Grading, Beckett Administration. First question or comment or thing I want to talk about is what I'm going to call condition splaining. Basically, if you have a card that is less than a 10, that is a very tough card, and it's an 8, do you really have to apologize that it's not a 10? The 8 might be the finest known. There might be only one 9 or one 10, so it might be the second best in the world. But all that explaining, it's a very tough card, and you've got a card in a great condition. If somebody is really into the hobby, they're going to want to know all the pop report stuff, especially if it's a vintage card. There's a 53 Stallmeyer Mantle that's surfaced for sale, and it's a PSA 9. That's a ridiculously good grade. There shouldn't be any apology. In fact, the apology ought to be that it's a 9 because it was cut from a sheet, I'm sure. It could never have been in a hot dog package. Again, I just think if a card is a 7, that's a great card. If it's an 8, it's a great card. If it's a 9, it's a great card. If it's a 10, it's a great card. Yes, the prices can be more the higher the grade. But again, the condition premiums, like I said, I just don't think when people come in and look at my card, well, if I've got an 8 of a really good card or a 7, I shouldn't apologize that it's only an 8 or a 7 of a card from the 50s that looks terrific. And I doubt that anybody other than a very advanced collector is going to ask me how many of them are better than that. And it might be 0. I have some rare cards that are maybe a 6 or a 7. I don't know anybody that's got anything better. Now, that doesn't mean it's extremely valuable. And low pop reports is not always about the population. It's about the graded population. Okay, question number 2. I had an idea. This has come up in conversation at a card show about a product called like a sleeve, where you take the card slab, a graded card, and you put, it'd be like the equivalent of a Post-it note that would go over top of the grade indication or the company indication. So you'd be covering up who graded it and what the grade was. All you'd be able to see is the card. I think that'd be interesting because you'd have to check out the card. Now, if it's a Post-it note or something like that, something very simple, it's 1 inch by 2 inch or 1 inch by 4 inch, depending if you're covering up the brand or you're covering up the number. But you can look at the card. And that's what I'd like to emphasize. I'd want to see the card. And if you covered up not the grade, but covered up what grading company graded it and that it's a 9, just look at the card. And then you peel off the slab sleeve that indicates, oh, yes, that's a PSA 9 or it's a BGS 9 or it's an SGC 9. Now, SGC, give it away because of the tuxedo look. Some of the look and feel of the slabs are recognizable to veteran collectors. But I'm in favor of anything that helps you to really look at the card and not the grade, see through the holder. And if it was a little Post-it thing, it would force people to do that. So you've got your showcase and you've got cards in there and they just have to look at the cards and they'd ask to look at it. And maybe underneath the slab sleeve, there's some indication of the price, or maybe you could put the price on that. Okay, number 3, I do listen to Jeff Wilson. One of his favorite things is talking about Desmond Ridder, one of his players that didn't pan out to this point. We bought it for $30,000 and now it's only worth $10,000. So what does he do? And he's very aware of the sunk cost fallacy that whatever he spent for it, that's gone. It's what do I do now? And if you think it's going to keep going down, you probably ought to sell it. And if you think it's going to go up, you might want to hold on to it. So I get that. Well, what I haven't really heard people talk about as much, and this came up in a conversation with somebody, is it easier for that Desmond Ridder or Zion or Ja or anybody else that's been up and then down, is it easier for them to reach the heights that they had before Or are they tainted in a way that people are really disappointed? But even if Desmond Ritter does get a starting position, he does do pretty well. He gets an opportunity, but can he reach the heights that he had when they had the unbridled optimism? Or are people going to be extra cautious with him? Again, that would dictate whether Jeff or anybody else that's holding a card that's gone down, is it tainted? Is it easier for that person to get back to where they were? I think it's harder. Okay. And number 4 was about knowledge. And people have asked me, well, where did you get your knowledge? You put a lot of facts together and it turns into knowledge. And if you can apply the knowledge, it becomes wisdom and understanding and insight. And I'm trying to have those things and I want to share those things. But I make a distinction, and this was part of the conversation that I'm sharing with you now, is that I think there's new knowledge as well as old knowledge. There's established knowledge. There's evolving knowledge. There's rapidly changing knowledge. Now, if you're going after goats and the glamour cards and chasing what's just come out, then you're going to be in that camp of the new knowledge, the rapidly changing knowledge, and you're going to track with that. Okay. All that is to say, none of that really matters in the dollar boxes. That's why my lane is there. That is established knowledge, not rapidly changing knowledge, old knowledge of knowing what the supply is for cards in the long tail. So that's why I play there. The new knowledge is easier in the sense that you can catch up. If you started collecting a year ago, you're going to have a hard time competing with anybody that's been around a long time buying cards that require established knowledge, but not emerging knowledge. Number 5, same thing, and this was about memory. I think it's come up when Rich and I have talked about to be able to work through a dollar box or just even be a collector, you got to have a good memory. But that memory could be short-term memory, your last memory, your recent memory, or your long-term experience memory. Rich and I both have an experience memory. We were there, and so we know what has happened over the decades. Again, not very applicable for this year's cards, but for vintage cards or pre-war cards, it matters a lot. It's the difference in looking at a comp as the last consummated sale as opposed to looking at comps over some period of time to know whether something is a good deal. If you know what the comps are for the last many years, you've got a different perspective than if you are only looking up the last comp from last week. And that's another distinction of when we had the monthly magazines, very different in the way we came up with the prices, but the pricing was more stable in the sense that it was never looking only at the last comp. It was looking at historical, what had happened throughout the month. And basically, I've said that people say, well, you just put the prices in the magazine and then everybody followed them. And not true. There were a number of experts and savvy dealers who knew that occasionally there would be meat left on the bone, that some of the cards that were priced a certain way in the magazines were actually, they weren't underpriced for when the pricing was locked in, when the analysis was finished, but they were fluid. And so frequently they knew that something was going up and it probably was going to continue to go up. And hence the next month it would go up again. Not a guarantee, but it did happen. In that sense, it was easier and brought some stability to the hobby. Number 6 was some people have asked about my dream team of the great teammates I had through the years, and especially in the early days of the Price Guide in the late 80s, the 90s, just terrific team that we had. And people have asked, well, what happened to all those? And I was realizing that many of them work for the card companies because they're talented. They understood how value was established in a product, and that became valuable to the card companies in the development of some of these the brands of the cards. They really understood the industry. And I realized that I think most of them did that. And there were only a few that went to become dealers, or one or two that started a card shop. I think the majority of them went to work for card companies. That's curious to me, but I guess it's a move towards stability. Okay, number 7 from my Podpage website, talking about the premiums on serial numbers are not always just based on how many numbers there are. If it's to 10,000 or 1,000 or 100, you'd think the lower the number would be better. And yes, generally that's true. But when you're talking about cards from the 90s, some of those early serial number cards, even though they have very high serial numbers, they're really tough to pull because the production quantities were so high. And so you have to evaluate based on if it's to 5,000, that could be better than a number to 500 10 years later if the production quantities are 10 times as high. They're just as many, but they're probably harder to pull. Oh, this is from Paul. He also mentioned, what about the non-serial numbered refractors? How are they affected? And basically, again, it's based on insertion ratios. And my learning experience is when I look in the dollar boxes, I'm seeing a lot of colored prisms and different kinds of refractors that are not mass produced in one sense, but when there's a lot of base cards and the refractors are a percentage of that, and even regardless of color, they're still going to be pretty common. They're going to be pretty easy to get. Number 8, this is about the 10Xing, the hobby, mentioning that Major League Baseball is not coming on strong. And so 1P4G says baseball will be lucky to not minus 10X. It wouldn't be minus 10X. It might be 0.1X or 0.9X. But I don't think Fanatics is going to 10X the baseball card hobby. I think they're interested in 10Xing the industry. And baseball, I don't think will be 10X because baseball is the incumbent, is the established one. Number 9, this is from Mookie. He's calling it the nearly wrongful arrest of me when I was working extremely late in my office at a corner office. And he's curious how that went down. And I am too. I was working on a price guide. I'm sure this had to be 94, 95, possibly early 96. I would have been in my smaller office where I did all the price guide stuff. Our building was securely locked down. So I'm wondering, did they have a key? Or was there a code? Is there some way they could get in? At any rate, my back's to the door. They walk in. I just literally jumped out of my chair. It was before I had a heart attack. I could have had a heart attack that night. Again, it's 3:00 in the morning or something. They came up behind me. I don't know that they tapped me on the shoulder. It was horrible. They couldn't arrest me because I was not criminally trespassing. I owned the building. And so I think they had a laugh, but it wasn't very funny to me. But I guess I should be happy that security was good. And last one, number 10 from Stooks, Scott. He says he really liked my Dirty Jobs episode. And I thought about doing that for a long time. And I really did it for my family and friends that don't know some of that backstory. It's probably what made me who I am. I've always been a hard worker. But you can't always pick your jobs, and some of them are crummy and some are good. He's talking about when he was in college, and he says collecting soda bottles. I think that's just picking up soda bottles that had a deposit, which was a nickel or something. So I did that when I was 12. I didn't really call it a job. Newspaper routes, never really did that. I wouldn't have been good at that. And then he talked about office cleaning and dog catcher. Well, didn't do those. Dog catcher, Scott, you're a better man than I am. I have a dog and I've got a great dog now, but maybe I'm cleaning up after the dog. And that is a non-paying job with my wife, who actually does most of that dirty stuff, but I'm happy to help. But again, I'm talking about jobs I had a long time ago. Just working alongside people, you realize some people have different work ethics. You can be really smart, but if you're not a hard worker, then that's really not helpful in some jobs. Anyway, thanks, everybody. Some more questions. Keep them coming. I'll look forward to seeing you at the National. If you're there, have fun collecting.